I had already reached for my coat when the waitress touched my arm and quietly said, "You might want to stay." Her voice wasn't urgent. It wasn't dramatic. But there was something in her eyes, something steady and knowing, that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. It felt like standing at the edge of a moment that could either disappear forever, or change everything. And I didn't know it yet, but walking out that door would have been the biggest mistake of my life. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that sometimes life puts people in your path for a reason, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to The Kindness Chronicles. Stories like this deserve to be felt, remembered, and passed on. Because what happened that night, it wasn't just a blind date. It was something much bigger. I hadn't wanted to go in the first place. The idea of blind dates always felt like a strange gamble to me, two strangers forced into a situation where expectations hang awkwardly in the air like unfinished sentences. But my sister had insisted, with that relentless optimism she carried like a badge of honor. She told me he was different, that I needed to stop closing myself off after everything that had happened. Everything that had happened. That was her way of saying heartbreak without saying the word. It had been 2 years since my last relationship ended, but the aftershocks still lingered. Trust didn't come easily anymore. Hope came even harder. Still, I agreed. Maybe out of exhaustion. Maybe out of curiosity. Or maybe, deep down, there was still a part of me that wanted to believe things could change. The restaurant was warm and softly lit, with the kind of gentle ambience that makes everything feel slightly more intimate than it actually is. The kind of place where conversations are meant to linger and time seems to slow down just enough to let you breathe. He was already there when I arrived. Sitting alone at a table by the window. At first glance, nothing about him stood out. He looked ordinary. Simple. Quiet. His posture was slightly stiff, his hands resting neatly on the table as if he were afraid to move them. When I approached, he stood up quickly, almost too quickly, knocking his chair slightly off balance before catching it. There was an awkwardness about him that immediately made me uneasy. Not because it was offensive, but because it felt unfamiliar. We introduced ourselves, sat down, and the conversation began, if you could even call it that. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't rude. It was just, disconnected. He paused often, like he was searching for the right words and losing them halfway through. Sometimes his responses didn't quite match the flow of what I was saying. Other times, there were long silences that stretched just a little too far, leaving me scrambling to fill the gaps. I tried. I really did. But the more time passed, the more I felt that sinking realization settle in. This wasn't going anywhere. I glanced at the clock. Only 20 minutes had passed. It felt like an hour. And then there were the small things. The way he tilted his head slightly when I spoke, like he was trying to catch something just out of reach. The way his gaze didn't quite meet mine, drifting just slightly off-center. The way he hesitated before reaching for his glass, his fingers brushing the edge before finding it. At the time, I didn't understand what I was seeing. All I knew was that something felt off. And instead of leaning into curiosity, I leaned into judgment. I told myself it was okay to leave early. People did it all the time. No one was obligated to stay in a situation that didn't feel right. I convinced myself I was being practical, honest, even respectful by not dragging things out. So I waited for a pause in the conversation, offered a polite smile, and said something vague about an early morning. He nodded. Just nodded. No protest. No disappointment. No attempt to change my mind. That should have made it easier. But for some reason, it didn't. I stood up, reached for my coat, and turned toward the exit. That's when it happened. The waitress stepped in front of me. Not in a confrontational way. Not in a way that drew attention. Just enough to gently stop me, her hand lightly brushing my arm. "You might want to stay," she said softly. I blinked, confused. I assumed she thought I had forgotten something. My bag, maybe. Or my phone. But she didn't look at the table. She looked at me. There was something in her expression, something steady, almost protective, that made me pause. "I'm sorry," I said. She hesitated for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. Then she leaned in just slightly, lowering her voice. "He's been coming here every week for the past 3 months," she said. "Always asking if anyone has canceled a reservation. Always hoping someone would say yes to meeting him." I felt something shift in my chest. A small, uncomfortable crack. "I don't understand," I said quietly. She glanced toward the table where he still sat, hands folded, waiting. Then she looked back at me. "He lost most of his vision 2 years ago," she said gently. "It's been hard for him. He doesn't always connect the way people expect. But he tries. Every single time, he tries." The world seemed to slow down. Suddenly, all those small things, the pauses, the missed eye contact, the careful movements, they rearranged themselves into something else entirely. Something I hadn't seen. Or maybe, something I hadn't bothered to see. "He almost didn't come tonight," she continued. "Said it was probably pointless. But he came anyway." I swallowed hard. The weight of what she was saying pressed against me, heavy and undeniable. "He's kind," she added. "Really kind. He just needs a little more time than most people are willing to give." I didn't realize I was gripping my coat until my fingers started to ache. For a moment, I stood there, caught between 2 versions of myself. The one who walks away. And the one who stays. The easy choice was still right there in front of me, the door, the exit, the clean escape from discomfort. But for the first time in a long time, I questioned it. I thought about how quickly I had judged him. How easily I had decided he wasn't worth the effort. How ready I had been to leave without even trying to understand. And suddenly, it didn't feel right anymore. Not even a little. I turned back toward the table. Each step felt heavier than the last, like I was walking into something uncertain and unfamiliar. But there was also something else there, something quieter, steadier, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this moment mattered. When I reached the table, he looked up slightly, as if sensing my presence more than seeing it. "I thought you left," he said softly. I sat down. "I almost did," I admitted. There was a pause. A different kind of pause this time. Not awkward. Not empty. Just honest. And that's when things began to change. What followed wasn't some perfect, cinematic transformation. It was slow. Messy. Real. I started asking different questions. Not the surface-level kind, but the kind that actually invites someone in. And when I did, I noticed something shift in him too. He opened up. Not all at once. But piece by piece. He told me about the accident that changed everything. About how he had to relearn simple things, walking through crowded spaces, recognizing faces, trusting his surroundings. About the loneliness that came with it, the way people slowly drifted away because they didn't know how to handle the change. He told me how silence became both a comfort and a burden. How he learned to listen more carefully than ever before. How he still believed, somehow, that connection was possible, even if it took longer. And as I listened, something inside me softened. The impatience I had felt earlier dissolved into something else entirely. Respect. Admiration. And something deeper I wasn't ready to name yet. Time passed without me noticing. The conversation, once strained and fragile, began to flow in a way that felt natural. Not perfect, but real. And for the first time that night, I didn't want to leave. We stayed until the restaurant was nearly empty. When we finally stood up to go, there was no rush, no awkwardness. Just a quiet understanding that something meaningful had happened. Outside, the air was cool and still. We said goodbye. But it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something we hadn't fully discovered yet. Months later, I found myself back in that same restaurant. Same table. Same soft lighting. But everything felt different. Because this time, I wasn't sitting across from a stranger. I was sitting across from someone who had taught me one of the most important lessons of my life. That not everything meaningful is obvious at first glance. That sometimes, the most beautiful connections are the ones that require patience. And that kindness, real kindness, often begins in the moments when walking away would be easier. If this story touched your heart, if it made you pause and think about the people you might have misunderstood or the moments you almost walked away from, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to The Kindness Chronicles.